Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson. It's Black History Month, and Detroit is a city that is really rich with African American achievements. On today's program, we're bringing you a few of those stories. We start with the family roots of Wayne County Executive Warren Evans. He grew up with a front row seat to the civil rights movement, given his family was closely aligned with a lot of the black leaders in that period. His family was also connected to the historic Idlewild Resort and Dunbar Hospital, which was Detroit's first and only black hospital. I'm pleased to have Wayne County Executive Warren Evans as my guest today. Welcome back to
Thanks,
the program.
Stephen. Good to be here.
Yeah, so I have to say, this is something I don't think I knew about you.
Okay.
this rich
Hopefully there are a few of those.
Yeah, right? This rich history connection that you have, family connection to the civil rights movement and the sort of African American firsts here in the city.
Very, very strong family for advocacy for black folks for a long time. My grandfather, Dr. Albert B. Clegg Sr., was the first city physician in Receiving Hospital, first person of color as a city physician there, active in food co-ops in the neighborhood. You know, his son became a prominent minister in Detroit, an advocate for causes at ages where you just absorbed it. You didn't necessarily know what was going on, but you grew into it.
Sure. Yeah. So talk about, I mean, we should talk more about Clegg in particular and that connection, because that's a name that I think most people do know and know the history of it. But I'm really curious about, you know, growing up here in the city, how all of that played out for you and how it influenced the things that you do today and the person that you are.
I think it certainly was a significant influence. So much of it when I was young, I absorbed it as it seemed as a part of regular day-to-day activity, and until you get older and realize what a unique experience this was. My family, mother and father, had in the basement of their home the offset printing for the Illustrated News, which was much like a Michigan Chronicle, a weekly in that period of time. And, you know, I come home from school, the movers and shakers in the black community, activists in the black community, were sitting there in the basement. Printing the paper, talking about next week's paper, that sort of thing. And so not many kids grow up to come home and maybe you got Martin Luther King there, maybe you got Coleman Young in the basement, maybe you got Ron Karenga in the basement, maybe you got H. Rap Brown in the basement, you know, folks talking about, you know, the civil rights movements and the import of it. I mean, I always was smart enough to go sit down on the stairs and listen. It was fascinating to me. I just didn't know the overall significance and importance at such a young age, 15, 16.
Yeah. Do you feel like your professional life now reflects things that you heard or saw at that time in terms of these sort of giants of the civil rights era?
Yeah, absolutely. With a real understanding that public service is, you know, something to treasure and to do. You don't do it for you. You don't get rich here. You know, it's something that you do because it's the right thing to do, and the importance of social justice and the importance of, you know, inclusion and the importance of diversity. If you look at my staff today, you'll see just how much I learned about inclusion and diversity in terms of people. And I don't give it a second thought because it's the natural way that I am. But I'm sure it came from what I learned.
Let's talk about Clegg in particular and the role that he played in the civil rights movement, that era. I mean, that's a big name here in Detroit.
Reverend Albert B. Clegg was the founder of the Shrine of the Black Madonna, a social activist, significant social activist through, you know, I remember the Freedom Now Party, and there are a few people probably out there old enough to remember
that.
And the significance of the Freedom Now Party was trying to get, you know, black voters acclimated to the fact that you really can vote for black people. And there really are some qualified people of color out here to run for offices. And so those campaigns back in those days, you rode around in a sound car with the little PA system, you know, talking to folks. And I remember vividly doing that as a kid. And, you know, watching for the election results and just kind of watching the evolution of Detroit as it grew, at least in some stature, for people of color and
Right.
all of the pitfalls and things that come with that process, because
Yeah.
people do not cede power anywhere voluntarily. There's
Right.
always going to be a push for equity.
Right. When you talk about the shrine, you know, the thing that's associated most with that, I think, in people's minds is radical black politics and radical activism. Talk about how that relates to the things that you do now. I mean, I think most people who know you think of you as a very level-headed, moderate office holder, and wouldn't connect you necessarily to that. Talk about how you.
I think it's evolution.
Yeah.
I think what was radical then is mainstream today in many respects, and so it's the evolution of a process. How do people perceive it?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting way to put that. So you don't see the politics of the shrine as somehow different than the things that.
No, it was advocacy
Right.
for equity for people of color.
Yeah.
And thank God, in many respects, that has worked, and there are more people of color in the decision-making process, which changes and evolves things. So the same advocacy of the '60s is not necessarily the same prototype, you know, for 2020.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got you here, and I want to make sure I ask just a little bit about transit while you're here. You have stepped out front of that debate regionally and really put it on your shoulders. We're seeing some other people slump in their chairs, I think, right now. How worried are you that we won't get another bite at that apple?
I'm cautiously optimistic and slightly worried at the same time. I mean, I think putting off transit is almost tantamount to saying I don't want it. And I think we've seen with the Amazon bid and others, people can argue about not getting it, but the truth of the matter is not only that we didn't get it, we didn't even make it into the top 20.
Yeah.
And one of the functional issues was your lack of ability to move people from one place to the other in a significant way. And while that's not the only issue, don't minimize the importance of the issue.
Right.
So we need to do something, I think, regionally for transit, and I'm not so sure we get there, but it won't be from a lack of work on our part. My staff has been working on transit every day since April, along with the other stakeholders trying to pull something together. So it hasn't been a Johnny-come-lately approach to it, but it's a hurdle that we've been fighting for 40 years, and hopefully we don't fight it another 40.
Keep after it, and we just never get there. If we don't get it this year, then what?
Well, you hear people say, let's put it off till 2020 for whatever reason. I'm just not so sure that 2020 isn't a code word for let's just put it off.
Yeah.
You know, people can argue, well, you know, have a smart millage coming up, so you don't want to put it up at the same time. I mean, I think things stand for themselves. I mean, either you're for the regional approach or you're not. And in every region, you're going to have disparities in income. You're going to have differences in who lives where and what. But if you really believe we need to be able to move people back and forth, fill jobs that are there, get people to the educational institutions, get to the airport and back in a way that makes a lot of sense, that does attracts investors and it attracts opportunities in people. And for the region to grow, we need that.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine that your ancestors here in Detroit would be very proud of the work you're doing there. So
I hope they would be.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.